I never thought I'd wake up one summer morning to find smoke rising from my shoreline. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors was having a bonfire too close to the water. But then the smell hit me: burned fiberglass, paint, and wood. I ran down the path barefoot, heart racing, only to find my old blue paddleboat engulfed in flames, black smoke curling into the sky. That boat wasn't just a toy. It was a piece of my childhood, something my father had saved up for and handed down to me. And there she was, burning, while a few HOA members stood back with smug smiles, watching like it was some kind of neighborhood entertainment. Standing right there, arms crossed and sunglasses on, was Karen, the president of the HOA. She didn't even look shocked or scared. She looked satisfied. I shouted at her, demanded to know what had happened, and she just shrugged, saying maybe I should have kept my junk off community property. That phrase hit me like a punch in the gut. Community property. She knew as well as I did that this was my land, my shoreline, my lakefront. But the HOA had always acted like they owned it, like they had the right to tell me what I could or couldn't do. Before I could even get a hose to the fire, sirens wailed. A sheriff's car rolled up, lights flashing, and 2 officers stepped out. The neighbors who had gathered whispered among themselves, probably thinking I was about to be hauled off. The cops walked right past the HOA president and came straight at me. One of them told me to calm down, that they'd had reports I was threatening people, that I had illegally docked the paddleboat on community waters. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My boat was literally burning to pieces in the background, and they were acting like I was the problem. I told them flat out that the HOA didn't own this land, that I did. The officers exchanged a look, clearly already biased. Karen smirked and piped up, saying the HOA had warned me several times, and now this was consequence. She even suggested maybe I had set my own boat on fire for attention. I felt my fists clench, but I forced myself to breathe. If I lost it, I'd give them exactly what they wanted. After the fire department finally came and put out what little was left, I stood by the charred remains. All that was left of the paddleboat was a blackened frame half sinking into the shallows. My father's initials, which he had carved into the side years ago, were gone. Memories gone, history gone, and the worst part, they were all standing. They're talking about it like it was some neighborhood win. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, pulled out a folder, and laid out the paperwork I'd been holding onto for years. Deeds, surveys, water rights, documents, everything proving what I had always known. I didn't just own my plot of land. Decades ago, when the subdivision was built, developers sold the homes around the lake, but kept the actual lakefront rights intact with my family. And those rights had been passed down to me. The HOA thought they controlled it, but the law said otherwise. Still, I wasn't ready to play my full hand yet. I wanted to see just how far they'd push me. And push me they did. The very next day, I had 2 violation notices stuffed in my mailbox. One for illegal shoreline use and another for destruction of community property. The audacity of these people was almost laughable if I hadn't been so furious. They burned my paddleboat, then blamed me for destroying it. They called the cops on me, then acted like I was the one trespassing. I knew I had to document everything. I set up cameras along the shoreline, kept every notice, recorded every conversation. The HOA thought they had the upper hand, but I had patience and I had the law. And when the time was right, I was going to show them just how badly they had underestimated me. But that wasn't all. A neighbor I'd known for years, an older guy named Bill, came by quietly that evening. He looked around to make sure no one was watching and told me he'd overheard Karen bragging about teaching me a lesson. He said he even saw a couple of HOA board members hanging around near the boat the night before the fire. That was The confirmation I needed it hadn't been an accident. They'd done it on purpose, thinking they could scare me into compliance. Little did they know, I hadn't just destroyed a paddleboat. I'd lit the spark for a battle I was ready to fight with everything I had. The cops were still standing by the remains of my paddleboat, clipboards in hand, trying to piece together exactly what had happened. I stood with my arms crossed, the smell of melted plastic and charred wood still hanging in the air. The HOA president, a smug woman named Brenda, was pacing around like she was the victim, pointing at me and loudly telling anyone who would listen that I was the problem. You can't just put junk in the lake. She snapped at me, her face twisted in righteous indignation. This is private property, and you're violating HOA codes. I tilted my head at her, calm but firm. Private property. Brenda, do you even know who owns the lake? She sneered. The HOA does. We've managed this community for decades. That lake is under our authority. And your little floating trash heap was lowering property values. That was when I couldn't help it. I laughed. A low, steady laugh that made Brenda's smugness falter for the first time that day. You think the HOA owns the lake? Asked, stepping closer, my voice calm and steady. Brenda, I own the lake, every inch of it. The land, the water, the dock, the shorefront tits, all deeded to me. The HOA doesn't own a drop. Her jaw went slack, but she quickly tried to recover, waving her hands as though brushing off my words. That's absurd. We've enforced lakefront rules for years. People pay dues for lake access. You can't just... I pulled out my phone and scrolled quickly through my files. I had anticipated something like this might come up one day, so I kept everything ready. Within moments, I held the screen up in front of her face. See this? I said. Property deed, county records. And here's the kicker. When this community was built, the developers never transferred ownership of the lake to the HOA. They left it in private hands. My grandfather bought it outright decades ago, and it passed down to me. So technically, you've been charging people for something you don't own. One of the police officers leaned closer to look at my screen, then raised an eyebrow. He's right. This is legit. Brenda's face turned red. She sputtered, opening and closing her mouth like a fish gasping for air. For the first time, she didn't have a quick answer. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she and the officers could hear. You burned my boat. You destroyed my property. You called the cops, thinking you could pin this on me. But what you've really done, Brenda, is trespass and vandalize something on land you don't even control. The officer beside us cleared his throat and turned to Brenda. Ma'am, based on what I'm seeing, he's correct. If he owns the lakefront, then the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here. You may want to stop before this gets worse. Brenda's smugness crumbled into raw fury. She shook her head, her voice rising with desperation. This is ridiculous. He's lying. He's making it all up. The HOA has always controlled the lake. It's in the bylaws. I smiled, calm and collected. The bylaws can say whatever you want, Brenda, but the law says I own the lake. Her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I could see the fear in her eyes because she realized she wasn't just wrong, she was exposed. For years, they've been exploiting the lake, enforcing their bogus rules. It's collecting money from residents who thought the HOA had authority. And now the truth was out. One of the residents who had gathered to watch the commotion stepped forward. Wait a second. He owns the lake, then all the fees we've been paying the HOA for lake access were what? Fraudulent. Brenda turned on him. No, absolutely not. It was maintenance fees, upkeep, but the crowd was already buzzing, whispering to one another. Eyes were shifting, suspicion growing. The officers, meanwhile, were exchanging glances that told me they were seeing exactly what I wanted them to see. The HOA wasn't just wrong, they might be in real legal trouble. I stood tall, letting Brenda squirm in the silence that followed. She had set fire to my property, called the cops, and tried to flex HOA power that didn't exist. But in trying to bury me, she had dug her own grave, and I wasn't done yet. The cops showed up with flashing lights cutting across the water. I stood there, arms crossed, paddleboat ash still floating on the lake. The HOA president, smug as ever, waved them over like she had just caught me committing some heinous crime. Officers, that man is trespassing on our lake property. He's violating HOA rules. Arrest him immediately, she barked. The lead officer, a burly man with a tired look in his eyes, tilted his head. Arrest? Trespassing. Ma'am, you said this was a neighborhood. Pond looks more like a lake. She sputtered. It is our lake. Our HOA maintains it, and he doesn't follow the rules. He brought this hideous paddleboat that doesn't meet our aesthetic code and refused to remove it. So we had to burn it for the good of the community. The officer's face went from tired to incredulous. You burned his property. You called us. I had been waiting for this moment. Calmly, I pulled a manila folder from under my arm and handed it to the officer. Here's the deed. This entire lakefront. It's mine. I own every square inch of shoreline. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here. In fact, they're trespassing. The officer flipped through the papers, eyebrows lifting higher with each page. His partner leaned over, whistling low. Well, I'll be damned. He's right. The HOA president's face turned a shade of red. I hadn't seen since the time she accused me of planting illegal flowers in my yard. She lunged forward, shrieking, "This is fraud. He forged those papers." I chuckled. Forged? The county clerk's signature is right there. If you'd like, officers, I can drive you down to the recorder's office and show you the original. The officer snapped the folder shut. No need. Ma'am, it looks like you and your board members are the ones in the wrong here. You destroyed his property and tried to file a false police report. That's serious? The HOA board members behind her started to fidget, whispering nervously. One of them even took a step back, like he was trying to disassociate himself from the mess. But the president wasn't giving up. No, this can't be happening. We're the HOA. We make the rules. He can't just do whatever he wants. That's when I decided to twist the knife. Actually, I can. Since I own the lakefront, I control water access, which means every dock you built, every boat you launch. You're technically using my property, and you've been doing it without permission for years. The officer's partner let out a laugh he tried to cover with a cough. So what, to mean the HOA has been trespassing on his land this whole time? Exactly. I smiled. The officers stepped aside to have a private word, leaving the HOA president glaring daggers at me. I could practically see her world collapsing. Her power, her smug little reign of terror was slipping through her fingers. When the officers came back, their verdict was clear. Ma'am, we'll need to take your statement at the station. Destruction of property, false claims, and possible harassment. Sir, he turned to me. If you'd like to file charges, you're well within your rights. I didn't even hesitate. Oh, I'll be filing. And while I'm at it, I'll be sending a notice to the HOA that they no longer have access to this lake without a contract. If they want to use my shoreline, they're going to pay for it. The board members gasped, and the president nearly fainted. For the first time since this nightmare began, the power had shifted, and this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to a strange sound. Not the usual birds or the soft ripple of the water, but sirens. Police cars were parked outside my property, and an officer was already knocking at my door. The HOA had called them, accusing me of destroying HOA property and illegally blocking access to the lake. Blocking access? That was new. I stepped outside, calm but already bracing myself. The officer, trying to remain neutral, explained that the HOA had filed a complaint saying I had built barriers, preventing residents from reaching the lake. That was when I realized what had happened. The HOA, clearly rattled by my lawyer's letter, had retaliated by erecting a flimsy wooden dock on a section of the shoreline and then claimed it was community property. When I had my workers remove it the previous week because it was built on my land, they spun the story into me destroying HOA property. I led the officer down to the water and showed him the survey stakes, the deed, and the county maps. The look on his face said it all. He could see I was right. "This is your land," he muttered, flipping through the paperwork. "They have no legal right to build here." But before he could finish, Karen marched down in her floral sun hat, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. She started ranting about community heritage, easement rights, and how selfish it was that one man could own a lake. She even tried to accuse me of being aggressive toward her. I stood my ground. "You burned my boat. You called the cops. You built structures on land you don't own. And now you're accusing me of crimes that don't exist." My voice was steady, but inside, I was boiling. The officer, to his credit, refused to escalate things. "Ma'am, this is a civil dispute. If you want to challenge his ownership, you'll need to take it up in court." Her face turned red as, "A tomato we will," she screamed, pointing at me. "You'll regret ever crossing the HOA." That night, I knew the war had officially begun. They weren't just trying to push me around anymore. They wanted to break me. But here's what they didn't realize. I wasn't just some stubborn homeowner with a boat. I had resources, legal backing, and the entire lakefront on my side. And I wasn't going to stop until the HOA was finished. What I didn't know yet was how far Karen was willing to go or just how much darker this battle was about to become. The court date finally arrived, and the whole neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Karen strutted into the courthouse with her clipboard, flanked by the entire HOA board, as though she were leading an army into battle. She was so sure she would win, so sure that the law was on her side. What she didn't know was that my lawyer had been preparing for weeks. We had everything: property surveys, land deeds dating back generations, and county records that clearly showed the HOA never had, and never would have, rights to the lake. Karen took the stand first. She launched into a dramatic speech about community rights and traditions, painting me as the villain who was hoarding a natural resource from the neighborhood. Her words dripped with fake sympathy, and she gestured so wildly that the judge had to ask her to calm down. Then it was my turn. My lawyer laid out the facts, piece by piece, with precision. He revealed how the HOA had been charging residents lake fees for years, despite having no ownership. He showed photos of my burned paddleboat, copies of police reports, and testimonies from neighbors who admitted they had been pressured into paying fines or risked being harassed by Karen. The courtroom grew silent as the judge flipped through the evidence. When he finally spoke, his words cut through the tension like a knife. Mr. Davis is the sole legal owner of the lake and its shoreline. The HOA has no authority over this property and has acted in bad faith by attempting to claim ownership. Furthermore, the destruction of Mr. Davis's personal property is a matter for criminal investigation. Karen's jaw dropped. The HOA board members looked like they wanted to crawl under their chairs. Then came the hammer blow. The judge ordered the HOA to cease all activities related to the lake, refund residents every dollar they had ever collected in fraudulent lake fees, and pay me damages for harassment and property destruction. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Karen turned bright red, sputtering nonsense about appeals and unfair rulings, but it was over. The HOA was finished. When I walked out of that courthouse, the same neighbors who once glared at me now shook my hand. They were free from Karen's tyranny, and I was officially untouchable. A week later, I sat on my rebuilt dock with a brand new paddleboat, the water calm and still around me. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe. Karen. She ended up resigning. In disgrace, drowning in debt from lawsuits and the court's judgment. The HOA never recovered, and me, I still owned the entire lakefront. Only now, I don't just own it, I control it, free from harassment, free from HOA nonsense, and free to live the life they tried to steal from me. Because when you stand your ground against bullies, even an HOA, don't just win. You take back your peace. And that's how the HOA's biggest mistake turned into my greatest victory. They thought they could bully me, but instead, they exposed their own corruption and destroyed themselves. At the end of the day, I didn't just win a court case, I won back my peace. It's my freedom and my lake. Remember, sometimes standing up for yourself isn't just about protecting what's yours. It's about proving that no one, not even an HOA, has the right to trample on your life. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good twist of justice. And hey, stay tuned, because I've got plenty more stories where this came from.